when you're looking for opportunities, you find the opportunities, but when you're not looking, it's like they didn't even exist in the first place.
I would write a love letter to my autoimmune skin condition.
If you don't set your own agenda, your own schedule, you'll be assigned one.
He had an NFL quarterback come to him. He came off the worst season of his career. So Dan runs all these tests on him, and he's like, yo, by chance you eat like a lot of fish? And the guy's like, yeah, I love to fish in the off season. And then he's like, yeah, that makes sense because you have mercury poisoning.
So Ryan Ayala, you're obviously the host of Alchemist Library, and you do a couple other things as well. Maybe you could share a little bit about those.
Yeah, so I started the Alchemist Library podcast, I think about probably like 20 months ago now at this point. Mm-hmm. So we're going deep into year 2. But really, like, it was a super selfish endeavor that I really had a desire for more stimulating conversations, but I didn't feel like I was getting that in like my everyday life. So mm-hmm. I was really just did the podcast to find a way to connect with people I actually wanted to talk to that I wouldn't have had the ability to talk to without the podcast. And I had some weird synchronicities and things that kind of led me to the podcast, which we could get into. But in terms of outside the podcast, I had an autoimmune skin condition when I was 16, which really like threw me into the world of health and learning about all those things. And it's just one of those things that became very addicting to me in terms of like focusing on health, eating good, lifting weights, and just training hard. Like all those things became so addicting after time. Like at first it required so much discipline, but now it's like those are the things you enjoy. Mm-hmm. So I really fell in love with like learning about diet and learning about training. And once I started the podcast, I decided I was pushed to start tweeting from a few other guys that I had on the podcast. And I did it, didn't know what I was doing for a long time, for like 8 months, and then started to kind of recently figure that out more and more. And both the Twitter stuff, the autoimmune stuff, and the podcast kind of collectively came together for me to have this idea for this lab work company that I have coming out a week from us recording, which is really the culmination of what got me out of the autoimmune condition and into starting to have like more true health versus like this fake health that most people fall into, which is like the absence of disease versus like thriving. And that lab work stuff really put me personally over the edge. So I really wanted to find a way to take those tests and be able to give them to more people. So I started this lab work company that should be coming out soon. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Right on. Yeah, I want to go on what you were saying. So the reason you initially kind of had the idea to start the podcast was you felt like you wanted to have some more stimulating conversations that you weren't getting into your day-to-day, right? I'm curious if you noticed the same thing, because I definitely did. Once you kind of went into that idea, started the podcast, you started to see opportunities maybe that were already potentially available to you, but you didn't maybe recognize them until you started thinking in that manner. So it's kind of like, you know, they say like when you're looking for red cars, you see red cars everywhere. It's like when you're thinking like, okay, who is someone I want to talk to or I could have interesting conversation with, then you realize, oh, if I am presenting them with a podcast, oh, this person could be available, this person could be available, this person. And then it's just like kind of domino effect in terms of realizing what the opportunities are available for you. Is that something you kind of realize once you kind of kick things off?
Absolutely. Like we just have this tendency to think so much smaller than we could. Like I thought it'd be impossible to get guests on the podcast. I thought it would be like, I thought the idea of having anyone who had any following whatsoever would be such a challenge. But then I come to find out that like people are a lot more willing to come on a podcast than you initially think. And then next thing you know, you have all these people whose work you admired for so long coming on the show and then like becoming friends with them after the fact from recording. Yeah. It's like you really just limit yourself in terms of what you think is possible. And like I have other friends who have a podcast as well, and it's like one example of this is this kid Arlen Moore, who he has a YouTube channel. He's kind of big on Instagram, and he posted on his story, like, looking to do more podcasts, hit me up. So I hit him up, whatever. We recorded this awesome episode in California. And I told my other friend about this, who's a podcaster who was in a similar spot to me. And then he was like, oh, shit, dude, that's awesome. You got Arlen on. Like, how'd you get him on? And I was like, oh, yeah, like, remember when I sent you, like, that story that he posted? I just DM'd him after that. And he's like, oh, shit, dude, like, I should have done that. Like, I just assumed that, like, my show was too small to qualify. And, like, that has come up time and time again of, like, solely getting big guests by asking. Yeah. And we just, like, think that it's so much more of an art than it is, when at the end of the day, it's just a game of volume. Like, you throw out hundreds of DMs and you get way more yeses than you possibly would imagine. And even some of the no's start incredible relationships and interactions with, like, Mark Bell, for example, who's a really big podcaster. I DM'd him to come on the show. He has, like, close to 500,000 followers on Instagram when I DM'd him. And then he was like, banned,
actually, didn't he?
Yeah, I saw that.
Got reinstated.
Yeah, which is crazy because he posts, like, nothing controversial whatsoever.
Just sharing value and info.
Yeah, nuts. But he was like, yeah, right now it's not a great time, but, like, love what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Shot me a follow. And we just have DM'd, like, a bunch of times since then. And it's like, that's even the no's spark really interesting relationships with people that you would have never imagined. So really, at the end of the day, it's like such a game of volume, and we have so many limiting beliefs behind what we think are possible with things, and just breaking through those is, I'm so grateful for the podcast for teaching me that there's so many things in life that are just solely self-imposed limitations, and the only way you figure out that they're self-imposed limitations is by actually trying. And you just realize that, like, these thoughts in your head are not even close to the reality that you think that they are when they're just these thoughts.
Yeah, it's kind of like your limiting beliefs naturally get exposed.
Yes.
And you might coincidentally end up having them proven wrong. And then it's like, okay, now you can't really deny that that's not the reality. It's interesting because, like, exactly like when you're looking for opportunities, you find the opportunities. But when you're not looking, it's like they didn't even exist in the first place.
Bro, 100%. It's like, like when I started the podcast, like I was listening to this guy, Andy Triana, who he's like a performance expert, but all of his work revolves around the brain. And I was just fascinated by what he was saying. I thought he was, like, such an incredible dude, so interesting. But I was listening to him on this podcast, and, like, the host kept interrupting him. And I was like, dude, this episode is so hard to listen to. It's so annoying because, like, Andy is so cool, but this host is ruining the episode. So I had, like, the conscious thought of how cool it would be to interview this guy.
And actually give him a chance to speak.
and actually give him a chance to speak. But then obviously, like, this was before I had the podcast. The limiting belief was like, if you had a podcast, why would he want to come on the show? Why would anyone want to listen to it? Like, these things just pop in your head. And then I took it as fact immediately. But then after the episode, I went to follow him on Instagram, and I realized we had, like, 30 mutual friends on Instagram, and found out that he grew up pretty close to where I grew up, and we trained at the same super small gym. So it's like, oh shit, like, maybe I could get this guy on the show if I were to have a podcast. And then again, those limiting beliefs of, like, no, that's stupid. Like, why would he want to come on the show? They just reappeared, right? So again, dismissed the idea of having a podcast. But then the next day, I listened to these guys, Analyze and Optimize, who have this YouTube channel kind of exposing a lot of corruption in the food industry and in Big Pharma. I was checking out their YouTube channel after listening to them on this podcast because, again, similar type of thing. I just loved what they were saying. And I recognized one of the two guys that runs the YouTube channel. I'm like, oh shit, like, he's the older brother of, like, one of my pretty decent friends from middle school. And I was like, what the fuck? And that was 2 days in a row of, like, my limiting belief of no one interesting would want to come on my podcast. Those were two guys that I probably could get on my podcast.
Yeah.
So after I had that realization, like, I just started writing down names for the podcast of, like, what I just got excited about the prospect of doing a show. So I wrote down like all these things around the word alchemy, because I was like, that's kind of a weird coincidence, those two things. And going back to what you were saying before, like when you're looking for opportunities, you see opportunities. When you're looking for limitations, you see limitations. So after I wrote down those names about alchemy, I was in Spain at the time. Nice. And I took a flight to London, and I land in London. It's like this beautiful day, and I go for a run, and I end up like a little far from where I was anticipating running. And I was like, oh shit, I probably should Uber back. Like I don't want to run back. So I'm just kind of looking around at my surroundings, and I see this beautiful restaurant, and I don't see the name of the restaurant. I just see this really cool logo. So I just walk towards it out of curiosity. And the name of the restaurant is called The Alchemist. So I was like, oh, fuck, like that's a little odd. That was like the same day that I had written down these things.
Yeah.
So then I hop in this Uber, and I play a song, which I've played a million times. It was like one of my favorite songs at the time, called On the Way by Russ. And in that song, he says, you got to listen to the signs and the omens. You don't want to miss your moment. And then later on, he says, got to go back and reread The Alchemist. And I was like, whoa.
All the signs.
That's a little weird. Like, all these signs coming up in a row. So then I go back and I read The Alchemist. And I find out that the main character in the book, his name's Santiago. He was probably like around the same age that I was at the time. And he was a shepherd wandering through Spain. And I was kind of in a similar spot for myself. So it's just like, what the fuck? Like, I kind of took it. The book is about following the signs of the universe, pointing you in the direction you're supposed to go. And I just took all those things as a sign. And whether that is coincidence or a sign or whatever you want to see, like, it doesn't really matter as long as you believe that it is.
Yeah.
Because if you believe in signs from the universe, or you believe in whatever it may be, like, those things are going to appear. Those opportunities are going to present itself as long as you believe that's actually possible. Whereas, like, when you close your mind to that, you're never going to see those signs, and you're just going to write things off. It's so crazy, back to your point of when you're looking for things, they appear. And opening your mind up to the possibility and not limiting yourself in terms of what's possible. Like, you just start to be presented different things than you initially would have expected.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I would guess this same thing probably happened for you after that. After your kind of limiting beliefs get shattered a little bit, and you maybe get that momentum of, okay, this person's willing to come on, that person's willing to come on, then you maybe see a few steps ahead of like, okay, if I'm going in this direction with this momentum, it's only a matter of time before this person will be willing to come on, that person will be come on, and you kind of see the kind of two different points, and you draw the connection line. So I can even say from my experience that happened because I was just had ideas randomly popping. Hello, it'd be cool to talk to this person. It'd be cool to talk to that person. Sounds like it was the same for you. And I was thinking, like, for example, in the sense of kind of a health-focused podcast, I was like, okay, well, who's the biggest health-focused podcast? I would say Andrew Huberman, right? And he's in my area. And then I was like, oh, and then also Matthew Walker, he's very close to me. So I was like, okay, maybe not immediately, but I can see, those being a few steps away. And then you start to connect the dots. I was like, okay, Matthew Walker's closer. Maybe I'll have him on first. And then he's friends with him. And then you just, everything starts to get connected.
Yes.
So it's pretty crazy.
And I've already seen that happen. Like, that shit happens. It happens all the time. It's like how I got Danko on the show. It's like, I loved Danko's work. I admired him. And I had a bunch of people on the podcast that Danko knew. And so when my DM came through, he recognized me because I had been on other people's podcasts, or I had other creators that he was friends with and people that he also admired on the show. So he had just recognized my name from doing that. So he opened up my DM. And I mean, that's awesome. Only in like year one. It's like, if you just keep that momentum, it's such there's such a compounding nature to things outside of just podcasting. Like, almost everything, when done consistently, has this compounding effect.
Yeah, and that kind of just proves again that point of sustainability, because, especially with the podcast, you're kind of pouring into it in the beginning. Like you said, it could take 5 years. You're playing the long game, so you have to be able to keep doing that, both from yourself because you feel like you're enjoying it, and, you know, from a resource perspective of time, energy, you know, even money. So when you do it in that manner, it just can move forward, and it's just a matter of time before it kind of clicks and keeps growing. I want to kind of go back a little bit, get a little more background on you, a little understanding. Kind of nice to always go back to the start with every guest and kind of see where you grew up, how it all began.
Totally, dude. So I never know where to say I grew up because I moved around a ton growing up, and I just never really considered myself to be intelligent by any like stretch of the word. I was like in school, I was always like falling behind. I had like a lot of trouble reading, and I never really thought of myself as somebody who would do anything remotely intellectual, because podcasting is an intellectual pursuit at the end of the day, and I just never really thought of myself in that way. And like as I look back, it's like throughout high school, like I didn't really get good grades, I didn't do great, and it's like I was chronically inflamed. I had a shitty diet. I was smoking weed like every single day. It's like, no shit, you don't feel smart. Yeah. And like once you fix those things, you start to eat healthy, you start to calm down that inflammation, you start to take out weed from your life. It's like, oh shit, like my texture of my mind has like completely shifted. And the more you read and the more you just learn, it's like this thing, your brain is so malleable. And this person that you thought you was and identified with is not the reality of things. And you come to realize that, like, or I've came to realize how different that we get to really choose like the person we want to be at the end of the day. So I guess that's a long-winded answer for me to just say, like, I didn't expect to ever do like a podcast or something similar to that, or be like an entrepreneur or anything in that regard. And it just kind of happened by following my natural curiosity and getting healthy. And it's a weird thing once you like start to try to improve yourself or to get healthy, because by getting healthy, you just improve every aspect of your life. And that in turn opens up so many doors, and it makes you think about things in such a different way. So really the gateway drug for me to this whole world was just focusing on my health. And by focusing on my health, I was able to really start to interact with the world in a different way than my peers. And it's weird when you're like going through college and you're focused on your health because everyone around you is so focused on partying. And we all know that we're the sum of the 5 people we spend the most time with. But like there was a point for me where I looked around at the 5 people I spent the most time with, and I was like, I just don't want to be the sum of these people. So how can I curate my reality in a way to be the sum of people that I actually admired? So I was like, fuck, I'm going to lean on books and podcasts to be the voices in my head more than anything else. And it ended up being the truth that like with the internet, you could curate that quote and change that reality from the 5 people you spend the most time with to the 5 people you listen to the most. And I made those 5 people like Joe Rogan, Chris Williamson, Aubrey Marcus, Tim Ferriss, like these guys became the voices in my head more than my friends. And so really that's just a very long-winded way of me saying that you can get better, and that's kind of just the background of how I got to this point.
So it sounds like the taking your health seriously was kind of that monumental shift. Was the autoimmune condition what kind of sent you down that path? Because you said it was when you were 16, right? So that was, I'm guessing, part of your way through high school. So yeah. What was that kind of process and journey like?
It's interesting because like when you get an autoimmune skin condition, or honestly like any type of autoimmune condition, the approach that's recommended to you by like your physician is there's nothing you can do. It's only going to get worse with time. Take these pills, do this thing, and hope for the best. And like because we see these physicians as such a beacon of hope and of knowledge, I just took that word as gospel. And I didn't take any pills or anything like that, but I took their advice of there's nothing you can do about it to heart, and I didn't even really think about changing anything too much until I was probably like 19, when I really realized that like there's no one coming to save you. Like, this is your burden to bear, and you got to figure it the fuck out. It's a terrifying thought, but it's also such a empowering thought in the same way. And you start to realize, like, there's a lot more you can do than what you're told. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of the internet is that it just opens up the possibility of you're able to see all these other people who did much crazier things than you and cured much crazier than diseases than you. So your mind's just opened up. So it wasn't really until college that I really made that switch, but I just owe it all to the internet and of honestly like stoicism, controlling what you can control and focusing on the obstacle being the way. Like these mantras that are preached throughout stoicism really became my guiding light, and I owe it all to that.
So you said kind of you weren't doing too well in high school, right? You weren't too into school, and then colleges when this kind of stuff shifted. What was your process kind of going through high school, transition to college, in your college time? Like, would you say you were kind of just going with the flow of things, and then a little bit later on in college is when you kind of snapped out of it, and like you said, you realized no one's coming to save you, and that's kind of when you took the reins of your own life and started really directing yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I played baseball all throughout high school and my freshman year of college, and baseball really like installed like a work ethic and like a desire to work hard within me. Mm-hmm. And so I got hurt my freshman year of college and I was out for the season. So in that time of just being stripped away from baseball, I still had this desire to like work hard, but I had no outlet to put it into. So it's like, fuck, like I have all this time, like I might as well start like studying. And through that, like I realized that, oh shit, like you just need to put in the work to get what you want. Like it's the same thing as any sport. It's the same thing as any pursuit. It's like put in the work and you can change how good you are at something. So it really was, cause and effect. So it really was like stopping playing baseball, or that injury that opened my eyes up to the fact that like you can get better at things. And then through that I realized like, oh, I don't love baseball, like I just love having something I'm excited to work hard for. Mm-hmm. And I think that holds true for a lot of people, is like when you have this thing that you're super excited to be disciplined at, or you're super excited to grind for, you become so much of a happier individual. And finding those outlets for yourself for things that you can work hard at and actually be happy to work hard at is everything.
Yeah, having something you're always striving for. That's actually something I want to come back to a little later. But yeah, that's crazy you say that, bro, because I had almost exactly similar experience to you in that sense of I played soccer and I took it very seriously, and my future and my goals were all related to that. And same to you, I had injuries which kind of forced me to stop playing competitively and then kind of stop altogether as well. And it was, you kind of lose your purpose in a sense, you lose what you're working for, you lose your identity in a sense, you lose the future that you had imagined for yourself. So it's like you definitely are lost, and I can say for myself I was lost for a while and trying to kind of figure out a new identity of what is that thing going to be that you can kind of latch onto, that is in a big sense kind of a proxy for self-development and self-improvement, right?
And so, did you realize that? Like, did you realize that, was it soccer for you that you loved, or was it a similar thing where you're like, oh shit, like I just need an outlet for my focus and my discipline?
Yeah, that's a great question, bro. I would say it was both, because I did love soccer, and you know, a lot of people with sports, they're like watching it or being involved in it. Like for me, it was, all that was kind of fluff. It was really just about playing it, being in that flow state. You know, that was just unrivaled. And for me, it was something I'd been doing basically my whole life since I was like 4 years old. So it was one of my main things that was correlated with my identity. And yeah, I was aware in that moment of like, okay, you lost this thing and now you're figuring it out. Like it took me a while. And then in retrospect, I was like, okay, that makes sense. But I did realize like the impact of, wow, how much I love soccer. But it was also, you know, the outlet in the sense of it's exercise, it's your sport, it's your, you know. So I kind of then went towards maybe working out in the gym, exploring that more, which was not a substitute for soccer in that sense completely. But I did realize exactly what you said, that you do need something to kind of commit yourself to and strive towards. That's huge. And so it sounds like for you, it was kind of the shift into podcasting directly then, or was it something else first?
I mean, it wasn't until podcasting that I realized that that's like I missed baseball a lot until I found the outlet of podcasting for those two reasons. The one that you said of flow state, and then the other one of having something you're excited to work hard for. Because there's so few things in life that give you that flow state. And for the average person, like, they probably haven't experienced a deep sense of flow since playing sports, whether that was high school, college, like whatever it may be. So finding those outlets for flow it's everything. And, you know, once you hit record on that first episode and you realize, like, there's stakes to this, and I always have to have something to say when this person's done speaking, and it forces you into the present moment, and that present moment brought out a focus and a flow state that I hadn't experienced in a while. And I was like, oh, fuck, like, this is it. Like, this is what I was chasing. This is what I missed, was being in the moment.
Yeah. A little bit of that kind of pressure, too, almost feels good, right? Especially when you're kind of used to it.
Dude, I love the pressure of it. It's so fun. And, I mean, that sense of, like, game day, of waking up with a big game that day, and you're just that sense that you carry throughout the day of excitement and nerves. It's such a good feeling, and like a big guest brings that out of me as well. It's like I miss that, you know. It's really a good feeling.
Having something to look forward to, exactly in that sense. Yeah.
Yep.
It's interesting because in sport, it's like what it sounds like was kind of maybe the case for you too, is when you, like you said, you kind of maybe started relating a little bit less with your friends when you realized you didn't want to necessarily become the sum of all five of them. And that's kind of when you're shifting away. In a sense, I'm not sure if this was the case for you, but a lot of people in those transition phases, you kind of potentially have some isolation, right? Or less social life than compared to before, especially in the case of like college. I would guess that's pretty common. Yeah. But like, you know, soccer and baseball, especially both being team sports, it's like you have a sense of camaraderie, you have a sense of community there, somewhere to push yourself, pressure, like we said, something to look forward to, game day. You have structure, right? Practices, games. So it's like when that's one of your biggest things, you're losing that. It's like your life structure. Everything's kind of crumbling as you knew it. So one thing I see, I think, a lot is people lacking that structure throughout their whole life, and having someone else. I think this could actually maybe relate to something Dan Koa said, right? Like, if you don't set your own agenda, your own schedule, you'll be assigned one. That's the case for a lot of people, but in our case, it was a good one that we were assigned in sport. But when you lose that and you don't replace it with something else where a positive one might be assigned to you, you have to figure it out on your own, and that's much more difficult, right?
Oh, yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, you know, I'm a big fan of discipline, and I think there's such a value in the skill of discipline and really disciplining yourself. But, like, discipline comes from clarity. Like, once you have a clear idea and clear steps of how to do something, it's easy to be disciplined at it. When you lack clarity, it's really hard to be disciplined, because you're like, what do I even be disciplined at? How can I be disciplined in going to the gym if I don't know what to do when I get to the gym? Like, that's a really hard thing. And that structure, like, it's everything. And that's why I think entrepreneurship is so hard. It's not the being on your own. It's the lack of structure that it gives you. It's like, oh, fuck, like, I can do anything. Like, I can just slack off for 3 days and no one's going to tell me shit. Like, this is all on you. Like, you have to create that structure within yourself, and it's not the easiest thing to do, but really at the end of the day, like, having that structure and creating that structure for yourself it really allows you to just be more disciplined in every facet.
Yeah, you're kind of freestyling, right? Like, you're kind of having to figure it out as you go, which is what makes it, like you said, you have like unlimited options. It's like, all right, you have to instill some structure and some sense of direction for yourself. Otherwise, you don't know where you're going to end up exactly. And something you were saying before really relates to male life, in the sense of, if you don't have clarity, you don't know what to be disciplined in. I think the way that really relates to male life is having a why, right? Because that's kind of your ultimate clarity that applies to everything. So especially in the case of adversity, which in my opinion is a critical part of male life, but it's just a part of life for everyone that, you know, can't really be avoided. That is what kind of, in the life sense, you know, gives you that pressure and pushes you. And having that why is kind of your clarity, which you can kind of fall back on and instill that discipline and that drive in yourself.
Totally. Having a why is so important. I think understanding and knowing your why, and truly like writing that out in really good detail. Just it, like you were saying, it just allows you to be so much more disciplined, so much more on top of things. Like, and that why changes. Like that why totally changes. Like when you start something to the end of it, and that's okay. But just like having that clear sense of why you're doing something, it just allows you to know whether this is a pursuit that I actually want to be embarking upon, or is this something that like other people are just telling me to embark upon? Like, is this a why that was assigned to me, or is this a why that I actually want to be doing?
Yeah, because it's much harder to be disciplined and specifically doing something that you don't want to do, or doing parts of something that you don't want to do or are difficult for you, but you know why you're doing it, so you can connect it to that. But if you don't know why, then you're just like, what the fuck, why am I doing this?
Oh, yeah.
So on that note, what would you say is kind of your why generally in life, especially in the face of adversity?
I think my why is... I think the phrase that comes to mind in terms of life as a whole is knowing that the obstacle is the way. And I don't really know how to phrase that in terms of like a why per se, but in realizing that like your biggest strengths come out of your biggest difficulties and your biggest challenges. And when you embark upon hard things, that's where you find meaning, because those opportunities only stem from that adversity and from that discipline. So I think like a true understanding that hard things is how you find meaning in life, like is big why. And that's not to say that I'm like the most like disciplined, dedicated person in the world. It's just like, if I had to give an analogy, and like that's the destination I'm going, but there's also the 18-lane highway to swerve within that. Like that kind of gives me the room to be like, okay, I don't want to do exactly this. I could change lanes and change this, but I know that guiding light is that I'm going to find meaning through difficulty. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of going through that obstacle. It's like, because you know that difficulty is where you need to be. It's like you're where you're supposed to be. And if you're trying to become the best version of yourself, you have to go through that. I think that's something that in the mainstream I've kind of heard only really from maybe Andrew Tate, and I think that's a concept that I think a lot of young men resonate with. When you understand, it kind of clicks with you that you're where you're supposed to be, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's good, actually, that you're facing an obstacle or you're facing adversity and a hard thing. It's like almost a weight off your shoulders, right? Because it's like a lot of the negative emotions can then just kind of dissipate.
It's so much easier to carry a burden when you know the beauty of that burden versus carrying the burden for no known reason. It's like the story of Sisyphus, like carrying the rock up the hill. If you have a why behind why you're carrying that rock up the hill, it's a lot more of a meaningful pursuit than if you're carrying up the rock for just to carry up the rock. And I mean, there's meaning in carrying up the rock if you choose for it to be. But yeah, having that destination of why you're doing something, like going back to what you initially said, it's the name of the game.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, right? And I mean, I think that's one of the reasons Andrew Tate has become so popular, is because kind of speaking on these things that maybe a lot of us men are thinking, but maybe you haven't even really articulated it in your own mind very well. So hearing it, it's like, it's almost like your thought got stolen out of your head, right?
Oh, yeah. He's so unique, and it's so interesting how popular he's became. I really had this like fascination with people and books or ideas that had like this cult type of following behind them, and being like, okay, like why is this the case? Like, why are people so drawn to this? And doing that experiment with Tate is so fascinating, because you're like, as men, we have so few examples of guys who are physically opposing, in great shape, intellectually opposing, that mentally are so sharp, and then also have this business acumen. And like, there's so few examples of that once we see a figure like that, it's just like, oh shit, like that's the guy I want to be listening to, because he has so many of the skills that I'm trying to cultivate within myself. Like, it's there's so few people that have those things all put together.
Yeah. Basically, to summarize what you said, it sounds kind of like you're touching on the fact that basically he's well-rounded in a lot of the key areas that we value. And this would be interesting because I don't think I've actually even shared this with you yet, so I'm not sure if you know it, but the name of this podcast is the Holistic Mastery Podcast. So that's a big theme of something that I value and I'm interested in is exactly what you said. So it's like he's kind of has mastery in a holistic sense. And that's, I think, one of the single most important things that we can pursue as men, especially in the areas that actually count. And you put work into them, but they also reward you back. And externally, they have rewards for the world and for people as well. So, I mean, like we were touching on earlier, you said health was one of the biggest things that kind of changed the trajectory of your life. That would be a perfect example of that, because it's like you're helping yourself, which then allows you to perform better, which then allows you to do things that are going to help others, and then you become a role model. So again, that kind of applies to the Tate example you said, physically, mentally. It's kind of being well-rounded and having some level of mastery and proficiency in many different areas.
Oh, yeah, and it's really just starting to see the effects of that and the fruits of that labor, because it's like I did all these things in terms of improving myself, like solely out of selfishness. Like I wanted to be better for myself. Like I wanted to be healthier for myself and for my own ego or whatever it may be. Like I really did those things solely for me. But then it's like a year, I had a friend who was 300 pounds call me out of the blue one day, and he was like, yo, I weigh the most I've ever weighed in my life. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, this isn't the person I want to be yet. I don't really know what to do. Like, I know you're into this stuff. Like, can you help me at all?
Yeah.
And to just be in the position to, like, off the top of my head, like, give him a protocol to follow and to help him. And then he's able to lose 120 pounds and hit me up this morning that he got his DEXA scan and he's 11% body fat and he's just shredded. And it's like,
that's crazy.
It's just like, holy shit. Like, that is a very tangible, like, by developing these skills selfishly, I was able to make one of the biggest impacts a human being can possibly make. Like, he tells me how much his mental health has improved and all these things. And then it's like, I see all my friends who weren't into these things initially, like, start coming to me with interest in weightlifting and in diet and helping them out with that, this, that, and the other. And it's like, now they're all on such a different path than they would have been. And it's so rewarding. And it's like, it's not one of the reasons why I initially did this thing, but you just come to find out that, like, doing these selfish pursuits, or quote unquote selfish pursuits, they end up not being so selfish when they're things that are improving yourself.
Absolutely, bro. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. And this is actually something I was just talking about in a YouTube video that was about basically becoming an outlier male. And exactly what you said, I wouldn't consider them selfish, because it's like your responsibility first and foremost is to take care of yourself, right? And only when you've taken care of yourself can you then take care of others. So you can't, as they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. So the more you fill up your cup, the more you have to pour into others. And that's exactly what we kind of see in someone like a Tate in the grand scale, is that he's someone that's taken care of. He has his own boxes checked off, and that allows you to put energy into external sources and to pour into others. And that reflects some of the main pillars of kind of being that outlier male, in my opinion, which are like responsibility, reliability, and maybe like accountability. But responsibility and reliability, I would say, are some of the biggest ones, because you have people relying on you. You're someone people can rely on, meaning you're going to be there for them, especially when they might need it. When shit hits the fan, you're someone that can be counted on. And you have the responsibility of, having things under your belt, your own responsibility. And that just goes to show, how advanced of a human, in a sense, you are, because you're taking care of yourself. And now you're taking on the responsibility for taking care of others. And I think that's something that's definitely being diluted in the kind of modern world, at least in some parts of the world today. That kind of pursuit of being at that stage where you can then start to take care of others.
Yeah. And I mean, it kind of goes back to that Jocko Willink idea of extreme ownership and of discipline equaling freedom, and the freedom of being able to help yourself and free yourself from whatever either self-imposed or physically imposed limitations you have, and then being able to help others get out of those shackles as well. It's like really just the more ownership you take and the more responsibility you take over your life, like just things open up and opportunities arise. It's one of those really unexpected virtues that come out of trying to improve yourself.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you said you were 19 and you realized like no one's coming to save you, right? It's like that's when kind of that fire gets lit under your ass and you realize that responsibility you have over yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And that's when you can kind of take that next step.
Totally.
The dominoes fall.
Yeah, and I've thought a lot about like trying to pierce out what the difference is between the person who takes extreme ownership over their life and the person who takes no ownership over their life and is just going about with the wind of whatever limitations they hold on themselves. And it's such a fascinating question. I think it might be different for each person in terms of how they're able to take on that burden of responsibility. But I really just think it comes down to like having, it's weird that like friends and on podcasts, I'll sometimes say that I would write a love letter to my autoimmune skin condition for the exact reason that the exact reason of the region beta paradox, which is if you were to go less than a mile, you'd walk it. And if you would go 2 miles, you would drive. So realistically, you would get 2 miles quicker than you would get to 1 mile. So it's like sometimes you need things to be more difficult for you to to get out of being comfortably numb and to have this pain be at a level sometimes that's miserable to force you into that. It's like, it's a weird thing, but a lot of times I think like just getting out of being comfortably numb is so important.
Yeah, that's crazy that you say that because I was literally just about to say, I bet now, like obviously the autoimmune condition and going through that was probably, not enjoyable by any means and probably pretty miserable. But looking back on it now, I would guess that you probably are thankful because like we were just saying, it seems like that's what kind of gave you a kick in the ass that led you to have that change in trajectory of your whole life, basically, where you switched into that responsibility and not going with the flow. And, just looking at the difference, for example, for you before you did that, going with the flow until, you really took the reins of your own life and directed yourself, it's probably night and day difference, right? It's that honestly kind of connects back to what Tate says is like humans usually you learn the hard way or the harder way. Mm-hmm. And it's like there could be some cases where maybe one can learn the quote unquote easy way, but usually if you can get it the hard way or the harder way and, come out stronger, like that's all you can really ask or hope.
And there's just so much skills that come out of climbing out of that hard place. Like you're able to pick up all these things that allow you to then move through life in so much of a better way when you get out of that place. And it's like people will always say, like in talking with people, they're like, dude, you're so wise. And I'm like, dude, it has only came from fucking being miserable and not being able to sleep for the entire night because I was in so much pain from this autoimmune thing. And it's like all of the wisdom comes from difficulty.
Yeah.
It's one of the weird paradoxes of life.
It's interesting because it's exactly touching on what you said. It builds basically a lot of confidence, right? Because it's like you have taken that responsibility. You've gone through that adversity and you figured it out. Like in the case of your autoimmune condition, the doctors weren't even of help.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people having non-conventional medicine, treatable health conditions or health challenges have a similar experience. I can say I have had that myself. Figuring it out and then coming through the other side of that, it's like you gain a lot of confidence in yourself knowing you made it through that adversity. And I think that's a critical thing in male life because without that, like you said, how would you cultivate those skills? How would you cultivate that confidence?
I mean, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. It's like Alex Hormozi talks about that. Like, if you were to design a human in a lab, what would you have to put them through to be tough? Yeah. And it's like, you probably wouldn't probably wouldn't be a bunch of easy things in like this rosy existence. It's like you need those things. They're a prerequisite to the wisdom or the success that you aspire to have. It's like you need that thing.
Yeah, a good life is not an easy life, right? It's like when we think about people we look up to, maybe like, for kids, like a movie character, a movie, it's like it's not just some monotonous thing. It's adversity, questioning, are you going to make it through, and all that. And I think that's one of the things that Andrew Tate has articulated so well. It's that you're supposed to be there. You're supposed to have that adversity, and it's actually a good thing. It's like changing your perspective on that is like night and day. And I think most people don't naturally tend to have that outlook on it. So it's like when you think about it that way, it's like just everything kind of opens up.
It really does open up, and it's like I think we hit the nail on the head with those points before. It's like it's just really those things that allow you to get to that point.
Yeah. Like you said before, like people said, oh, like, how are you so wise, right? It's kind of inquiring about your identity, right? Who you are. And I've actually had a kind of similar conversation, and that pushed me to actually think about the answer. Like, or someone was asking, like, why are you like this? And then some other people your age are not like you and they're similar. And I actually thought about it. I was like, well, I mean, what really defines or determines like who we are, right? And it's, in essence, in my opinion, a combination of your experiences and your decisions. Like the experiences you've gone through, maybe, the unique personality you're born with, and the decisions you make going through those experiences. And, as we know, like two people going through the same experiences could have completely different outcomes. One person grows up with an alcoholic father, never touches alcohol. The other one becomes an alcoholic. So that's where you can really, the psychology is very, very unique and interesting. And I think even the field of psychology might not completely understand it. But yeah, it's just kind of crazy.
It really is. It really is crazy. And yeah, you just like that fire lit under you. It's an interesting thing, like the difference between those two people. And I don't know, you see a lot of people who get out of like drug addiction get really into like running or really into something. They need like a pursuit to put that energy into. And it's almost like this extreme personality that led you to drugs, alcohol, whatever your outlet was. That extremeness is the same thing that would allow you to accomplish something great. Like it's two sides of the same coin almost. It's like that extremism is what can make you great or is what can make you a mess.
Yeah, finding that healthy outlet for it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's not easy.
It's not. Like everything, right? They say anything that can be really good can also be really bad, right? If it's powerful, that power can swing either way.
Yep.
I want to kind of circle back when we were talking about your journey and, when you started not associating so much with those few friends you had and going into the podcasting stuff. What was the transition like, kind of, in a sense, changing your identity, right? What was that transition of, maybe making new friends, changing your kind of orbit, your circle, what you consume in the sense of podcasts and all that stuff, and then actually going into being deep in the podcast? And I'm assuming you had somewhat of a new circle and new surroundings by then.
I mean, it's so interesting. It's like my freshman year of college, it was about halfway through where I decided, or when I had the realization that like I wanted to be better. I wanted to really try and discipline myself and like given a real attempt at like curing this autoimmune thing and just getting better like in general in life. And I was going out every weekend, and that like immediate flip of the switch was very off-putting to a lot of the people I was around and a lot of like my friends. And it's like I think Alex Hormozy calls it like the loneliness chapter of when you are setting off on this new thing, you're on this different path. It's like those people you're around are like, they start to get a little pissed off. They're like, dude, like come out with us. Like, dude, what's your problem? Like, if and it's a bit isolating, but I think it's very freeing when you realize that like it's all part of it. Like you have to experience that. It's like if you're going from this totally different person or trying to form this new identity, you don't have the skills or the personality yet to fully associate with like this different group of people or the people that you admire. You aren't that guy yet, but you are also no longer the guy who fit in with your past group of friends. So you're kind of just in this weird limbo phase. And I definitely like dealt with that throughout college, and I was lucky. Like I had a lot of my friends who were like super supportive and great people, but we were just different. Like fundamentally, their values were different than my values. So, it's a bit lonely, but I think it's very freeing once you realize that like that path is something that you need to embark upon in order to get to where you want to go.
Absolutely. It's those transition stages that can be challenging, right? But it's the bridging the gap between the new and the old.
Totally.
It's interesting what you said, the difference in the values. It was actually a clip of your podcast. I'm forgetting the guest's name. Was it David? He was a relationship coach, I believe, and he was speaking on the importance of male friends, close male friends. And it was like, I really enjoyed that clip because he articulated it so well, right? In just like 2 minutes, he got that whole idea out. And I personally hadn't heard anyone really say it in that manner, like that explicitly, that clearly. And I think, especially with like, the case of, as it seems through data, like male loneliness being kind of elevated in these times, especially, coming off things like COVID, people being much more consumed into the internet and on their phones and whatnot. Again, this is all so relevant because I just was speaking about this in a YouTube video. It's like having guys who are on a similar journey to you, who have similar values to you, and everything that he was saying in that video. It's like having someone to relate to. So exactly what you said, like, yeah, you're friends, you still had love, you still related, but when you're on a different journey and you have different values, it's a little bit harder to connect on those things, and that is something that you do need for fulfillment. Yeah. And I think exactly like your guest said, your quality of life will double and everything is just better, more fun.
Totally. Yeah, I think that in one regard, that's the beauty of the internet. And like you're able to find those people a lot easier. You're able to connect with those people. It's something that Twitter really taught me, is like there's this community of people who are very similar to you, and you just have to find them. And for some people that might be like going to a gym and going to like a class friendly gym that you're able to connect with people, like a jiu-jitsu or a martial art in general. Like there's a lot of those people out there. You just have to think about like, okay, what are the people doing that I want to be like? Like, what are these places that they're hanging out at? One of the things that they're doing, it's like, like I start the podcast and I start to hang out with a lot of these people I've had on the show, and you start to realize like there's so many people out there that are a lot more similar to you than you might think, and you just have to find them. And it's not a straight path. It's not like the easiest thing to find, but putting yourself in situations where you can meet those people, it holds true for both friendships and like real relationships as well. It's like, where is that ideal person that you're looking for? And go do those things, go to those places.
Yeah, exactly like you said. In the podcasting sense, it's like you're cultivating your own community basically, right? And then in the sense of creating content, it's like you're putting yourself out there and putting your values and interests out there, and then people who are like-minded and share those are going to be attracted to you. And then in the sense of like martial arts, jiu-jitsu gyms, I think that's one of the best examples. And it's funny because I think I saw something on Twitter where someone was saying like, where are you supposed to make friends after like age 35 or something? But in adult life, it's much more difficult,
so
right?
hard,
Most people are not in sports. There's not these places where communities gather. And a place like a martial arts gym is like the perfect example of that. So it's almost kind of like a full circle moment, right? Especially for like someone like me or you, where it's like we were in sports and no longer in that team sport. And then you're kind of circling back to seeing it really for what it was and finding another way to integrate that into your life. But obviously in adult life, it's much harder, and you have to, exactly like you said, find those places. People are congregating, and usually there's going to have to be a good reason. Podcasting, you're creating your own reason, like a martial arts gym, and really go for it.
Yep. That's the truth right there. It's really as simple as that.
So you had that transition with the podcast. So would you say Twitter is where you kind of found this, or when was it and how was it that kind of clicked for you in finding that new circle?
I think in two ways, and they almost happened at a very similar time. It was like my friends started to notice, like my original group of friends from high school and stuff, that I would still hang out with, but I just wouldn't hang out with them as regularly. They started to realize like how different I was and all like the positive effects that has happened on me, and like that aura almost got them interested in the things that I was interested in, to the point where like all my friends from high school now are super, as they would say on Twitter, like based, or like they're super into all like the health stuff and the training and the philosophy and
That's
reading
awesome.
and all these things. So it was like in one way, it was like my original group of friends matured into being guys that I really want to spend time with. And then in another way, Twitter like definitely made me have all these friends and allowed me to connect with a bunch of different people. And it was like I was getting invited to things and doing things like solely from creating content on Twitter and doing the podcast. It was like, oh shit, like I really have this whole new world and this whole new, I could go to all these cities in the United States and like hang out with people. And I mean, it's just such a cool thing. And it's one of those things I'm forever grateful for, because it really just opens your entire world up.
Yeah, that's awesome, bro. So kind of coming back full circle, you mentioned your kind of new project business, Labify, earlier. So kind of coming back to that, could you maybe, you were saying that you were trying to provide some of the tests that were needle moving for you earlier on with your autoimmune conditions. Could you maybe get a little more specific into like, you know, what exactly was it that made you start it now?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
what is the details of it looking like?
Yeah, so once I got super into this health stuff, I started to find a bunch of like health creators that I was interested in and just consuming all their content. And one of those guys that I really gravitated to that wasn't huge on social media is this guy, Dan Garner, who Dan Garner is I guess you could call him like a health coach to professional athletes. So he's like the health coach of Sean O'Malley, the UFC fighter, John Rahm, the golfer, like Aaron Judge, and all of these like big named dudes. And he impressed me so much, and he didn't have this like massive following. So I just like would DM him, say what's up, tell him thank you for the work he's putting out, tell him I'm enjoying X, tell him I'm enjoying Y. And ended up doing like a mentorship thing program under him for a summer. And
That's awesome.
That opened my eyes up to this world of testing, because that's his entire approach, is like, let's get really precise on what we have to do instead of guessing what to do. So let's test, since I'm working with these professional athletes whose budget is higher than the normal person, like let's just test everything. Let's get really, really precise with our approach. Let's analyze their stool. Let's analyze their urine. Let's analyze their blood. Let's analyze their hair and see what these biomarkers are saying about their health and what maybe some of the anchors are that are holding them back, and connecting the dots of all of those things to create a like very tailored protocol. So learning that was fascinating, and seeing things like Sean O'Malley having strep throat in his gut that they identified through like a stool test, and then taking like some probiotics and things to nourish the gut and to get rid of that, like double his testosterone in like 4 months from solely doing that. It was like so fascinating to me, all these little nuanced things. And so I just kind of applied that same principle like to myself. So it's like, all right, like what are some of these cool tests that like I would want to do that would be helpful? And at this point I was probably like 80% better with the autoimmune stuff, just from like kind of guessing with my health, like eating whole foods, getting more sunlight, like all these basic things that we hear. But then the thing that got me like really over the edge was doing like a super high quality food sensitivity test and taking like this urine test called metabolomics. Like these things really just like shined a light onto what I needed to be doing, what were some of the things that were holding me back. And then once I was able to get really precise with that approach, it was like, like immediately saw changes, immediately made the skin condition just like a non-issue in my life and not even like a thought. So I had that experience and it was so profound. And I saw Dan doing this at such a high price point and had such a high level that I was like, how can I just take these basic principles and this approach and take it to the masses in a way? So what Labify was really just the culmination of that knowledge that I learned from Dan and those tests that were really helpful for those professional athletes, and then creating different tailored panels of lab work based off people's needs. So if like you're dealing with a gut issue, you should get these things tested. If you're dealing with a autoimmune issue, get these things tested. So we could go into some of the specifics if you're curious, but like that was really the culmination of what I learned from him and why I started the company. And even just like a basic blood panel provides you with so much value in terms of like you don't need to break the bank in terms of getting all of these really expensive tests. Like just simple blood tests that aren't too expensive really like allows you to have so much of a better idea of like, okay, I should probably be eating more steak and taking a magnesium supplement. Like these things, you start to have a lot more clarity in how you approach things.
Yeah, that's super interesting because being a health coach, I can speak on that in terms of I see a lot of clients who like haven't even done a routine blood panel maybe even once a year in years, and it's not even a thought on their mind. And it's like, well, that's something that you can usually get through insurance, through your GP, PCP, and it's no cost, and it's just low-hanging fruit, and it's gonna at the minimum do no harm and maybe give you a little bit sense of direction.
Totally.
And then again, you can go from there. And it's like a lot of people, which I think why it's really cool you're doing this, is they're not even familiar with, this type of testing, especially like functional labs and functional testing. And it's kind of crazy because it's like it's so obvious. Like you have a problem that illuminates the solution. It's like a cause and effect in that sense, but it's like most people haven't even heard of it. And it's like, in my opinion, like, a gut test should be almost as standard as like, like a CBC or a lipid panel.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I wish it was like that because it would make things so much more available and cheaper. But I mean, even if you just think about like a basic like CBC test, which is like $5 and is like insured, it like one of those things is like white blood cell count, right? And if you're getting lab work done, so like they say the most you should do is every 3 months. So that's like 4 times a year.
Yeah.
So if you're doing that, so if you're getting your lab work done 4 times a year, you will notice if you have the presence of cancer, it won't tell you have cancer, but you'll see an elevation in white blood cell count that will allow you to then go and question things further and like maybe then go to your doctor and see things. And that's just one example, but you're able to catch things in its tracks before it becomes this life-changing detrimental issue for you. Like one of the things that we saw when I was working with Dan was like he had an NFL quarterback come to him, and he was experiencing fatigue, like inflamed, just achy joints. He came off the worst season of his career. He was older. He was thinking that this was just the accumulation of years and years of football, and everything was just starting to catch up to him. So he was thinking he was going to retire after this next season, but he wanted to work with Dan and try to get in the best shape possible before his final season. So Dan runs all these tests on him, and he's like, yo, do you, like, by chance you eat like a lot of fish? And the guy's like, yeah, I'm like I love to fish in the off season. That's like one of my main sources of protein, blah, blah, blah. And then he's like, yeah, that makes sense because you have mercury poisoning. Like you have mercury throughout your body that is causing these issues that you think are just older age, that if you went to his doctor, they would have just like gave him an anti-inflammatory and they would have never got to the bottom of it. And like the sad thing is that would have went on and would have got worse and worse. And then it would have got to a point where it was like detrimental for his life. Mm-hmm. And he probably would have died like an early death versus like catching these things in its track and being like, oh shit, we can cure this. We could get rid of this quickly. Maybe not so quickly in the case of like heavy metals because it's hard to get out of the system immediately. But like in that example, the guy went on, they got the heavy metals out of his system and he went on to like feel just revitalized, had the best season of his career, finished second in MVP voting after his worst season of his career the year before. So to me, it's like, if you can, there's so much value in doing these tests. And I think there's so much good that can come from just being aware of these things and being aware of what's happening under the hood.
Yeah. It was, in his case, considering it was mercury poisoning, was a treatment plan involving chelation?
So I wasn't too involved in that aspect of it. I believe so. I believe the protocol was a lot of herbs and supplements that aided in the detox process, and coupled with a ton of sauna and certain dietary things that would speed up the process and allow for the body to urinate and sweat out these toxins. But I'm not sure about the specifics. I assume so if I had to guess, but I wasn't too involved in that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, when you see cases like this, especially like this NFL player saying he had symptoms, but those being fairly general symptoms could often be chalked up to anything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
These days, it might even be chalked up to like mental health. You know, it's like, oh, maybe you're depressed. Let's throw you on some SSRIs. But
bro, it's
crazy. Like, when you see cases like that where it's like maybe a general symptom, or, you know, in the case of doctors where they're treating direct symptoms, so it's like maybe someone has autoimmune condition, maybe you have noticeable gut issues, digestive issues, but it's like when you see the extent of it, it's like, okay, well, a normal person who might not have like a severe issue or symptom that's, you know, catching their attention, they still might have some degree. There's probably going to be some things they can, you know, you're going to find and that they can improve on. So that's one thing that I think in, you know, I can't call it traditional medicine, but in like traditional naturopathic and functional medicine, it's like, yeah, you're usually treating people who have already a present issue. But that's what I think is cool about kind of the rise of, you know, health coaching and people becoming more aware of this kind of stuff, is that for, you know, kind of optimization purposes, these type of labs are also being used. Because like, I can even speak for myself. I took a gut test and yeah, I had some things that were going on, but it was nothing crazy, nothing severe. But there were a number of findings that were super interesting to see and that I could, you know, take actions based off. So it's
100%.
like super applicable for the average person, especially like in the case of that kind of work you guys were doing of optimizing an athlete, especially for entrepreneurs, to anyone who your performance matters. Like even those minute things, which like in that case it wasn't, those make a big difference.
Totally, dude. And it's scary, even like in formulating this company, and through that process, I had a lot of communication with physicians, traditional or Western physicians who just do the standard treatment of care. And I mean, the two things that are so crazy is like one of them, who was a physician in New York, said that he would love to run gut tests on his patients, but in New York, the laws are so strict that if he were to give people who aren't presenting like bad gut issue symptoms, he would lose his medical license. Like it was that extreme. And then I had another physician in California who California is like the most friendly state when it comes to physicians. He said that like, yeah, I would love to give my patients like a protocol that didn't involve a big pharma drug, but if they're presenting chronic inflammation symptoms, it is medical malpractice for me not to prescribe Humira or whatever whatever by the book drug it is. He's like, I would lose my medical license if I was prescribed that. And what's so crazy about that is like, oftentimes you need someone who's not a physician to get to your root cause, because if they were a physician, they're going to lose their medical license for doing what they actually believe.
Exactly.
It's fucked up. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting because until fairly recently, I mean, I guess a while ago now, but I had never heard specifically of someone getting like a gut test through a primary care physician. And I heard it a couple times and I was like, okay, well, they didn't even know what kind of test it was. So I was like, maybe it's just some, you know, very basic one. But then I even heard of, you know, the same labs that, you know, are used in functional medicine, like a GI map, get used for someone through, you know, primary care. I was kind of surprised, but you realize that's like the last resort, last step after it's already like extreme severe case. Yeah. And then there's going to be limited tools that they're going to be able to deploy based off those results.
I mean, it's so crazy. Like, I know someone right now who's a family friend who's dealing with some major gut issues, and, you know, they're so by the book and going to these traditional or Western medicine doctors whose approach is so, like, they're having these such extreme symptoms, but they're not even testing for these basic, I mean, I wouldn't call these functional medicine panels basic or these diagnostic testing basic, but they're so easy to employ if you have the money to do so. And it's like they still haven't even gotten those tests because their primary care doctor like doesn't see that as something that they should be doing, even though they're having these extreme gut health issues. And I just want to shake them and be like, dude, you're limiting yourself of what's possible, because even if these doctors knew everything in the world, they can't practice it because they would get their license taken.
Yeah, it's like it seems obvious to, you know, like you in that case, right? It's like, okay, you're having gut issues. Like, why don't you take a gut test and see maybe a window? Because again, like testing isn't 100% perfect either. And it's not the end all be all. And there are people even who specialize in testing who maybe get a little bit, you know, hyper focused on the data and trigger happy with testing, but it's extremely useful. And right now it's way more underutilized than even close to overutilized.
Totally.
So it's like, just the fact it's like it's giving you a window. Like they say with blood work, people think of it like taking a look at what's going on under the hood. Diagnostic. I like to use the example of cars for a lot of people because it's very, you know, a little bit technical. It's like, okay, in the sense of like nutrient deficiencies, it's like, okay, well, what if your coolant was running low or you had no coolant? What's going to happen, right? What if you never got an oil change? It's like the same thing. It's like, okay, what happens when you go to the mechanic? You actually have to pay them for their time to do a diagnosis. They're going to hook up maybe a computer and see what codes are presenting. It's basically the same thing with labs, right? But it's just like traditional medicine. It's just like, well, we're only have 2% of labs that we can use, and we can only look at these things. Everything else, we just kind of have to ignore it.
I think the car analogy is so perfect. And if you even think about like the GPS, right? Like, before we had GPS, like everything was a lot more of a guessing game. Like you had these maps that you would follow and you weren't certain of the direction you were heading in. But then when you got GPS, everything was so much more precise. And now we have a lot better GPS systems when it comes to our health, but we're just not utilizing them. Whereas with cars, everyone's utilizing the GPS system now. We're leaving a lot of money on the table for a lot of people who are dealing with conditions and things. It's sad. And I think we're heading in the direction, though, of this medicine 3.0, where we're getting a lot more precise with how we approach things.
Yeah. So in terms of Labify, you said you're technically launching next week. Are you providing all types of functional labs or just blood tests? And, you know, what's the kind of trajectory of that looking like?
So we're doing urine, stool, blood. We have like 2 different types of tests, or 3 different types of things. And we have like baseline panels, which are just for everyday people who aren't experiencing any major health issues, that are just standard blood work. And then there's 3 different tiers of that, depending on how exact you want to go with it. And then we have specialty panels, which are targeted toward people dealing with very specific things, whether that is skin issues, autoimmune issues, gut issues, mental health issues, menopause. Like we have these different panels based on if you're dealing with this exact thing. And then we have just the individual tests for people who are like, no, that I want to do a stool test. I just want to do a stool test. I don't want to have to get it in a bundle of a bunch of different things. So we also are selling like all of the tests that I think are the cream of the crop of that. So like when I was working with Dan, because they were such a high ticket, high item thing, they did a ton of research and testing in terms of what panels or what companies do the best job of this. So they would take the same stool sample and put it under like 4 different names and send it off and see what the difference would be with the results, and how different, how varying the results are, even with the same sample from the same company. So really through that iteration process, they've discovered what the best companies were. So when it comes to the individual tests that we're selling, it's really those tests that are like tried and true from the top brands. So we really love like Genova Diagnostics. They do like a really great job with their GIFX, metabolomics, Nutraval, their amino acids tests, and then we have some heavy metal tests. We have like a really good genetic test that's focused towards health stuff versus focused towards like where your ancestry is. So yeah, it's just really like trying to provide like a buffet type of option when with the individual tests for people if they kind of have an idea of what they want already.
I think that's so awesome, man, because you're hitting a bunch of different marks, right? You're one, making it more affordable for a lot of people. You're also simplifying it, making a lower barrier to entry. Like you said, that you have the kind of basic, standard, and more advanced. It's like you're putting less thought, making it easier. People can just kind of come in, check one of those, and either way they're not going to go wrong. And especially for, people like, just as a business sense and as a project that you're working on, that being involved in the lab space is just so cool. And it's only going to further your own, advancement of the field as well as your own understanding. And it's again a vehicle for growth, right? I think that's super cool.
Bro, yes. Going back to the vehicle of growth things, it's like one of the quotes that stuck with me so much and really like prompted me in a way to start the company is a quote from Machiavelli, which was, "Make mistakes of ambition, not sloth." And there's so much uncertainty when it comes to things and what is the right move to make at times. But I think as I meditated and reflected on that quote, it was like all the mistakes that we tend to regret in life are the mistakes we made out of sloth. We rarely regret the mistakes that we make from ambition. So I think always trying to think about things in that light and like lean closer towards, if you do make a mistake, making one from ambition, not sloth. That's how you learn and that's how you get better. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely. Keeping that momentum going, keeping that ball rolling.
100%.
So I guess on that note, we can kind of start to wrap things up. And a couple of questions I have here for you that are kind of touching on similar things we've talked about so far, but kind of summing everything up, I guess. We talked about the adversity, facing obstacles, and this is again on that note. So the question would be, what does the ideal version of Ryan look like? And what are you striving towards generally in life? Is that, the best version of Ryan, or what does that look like for you?
I'll sum it up in a more concise way, which is I'm striving for a clear mind, a fit body, and a house full of love. So if I accomplish those three things, that's really the guiding light in the direction I'm trying to head in.
Awesome, brother. Thanks for coming on, man. It was great to have you.
Bro, thank you, dude. This was awesome. I think a good mark of a podcast is when you don't realize, one, how much time has gone by.
Yeah.
And two, when it has like a perfect arc. When you like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of times with the good conversations, it just, there's a rising action, there's a climax, and then there's the downfall. Mm-hmm. And I think that we perfectly accomplished that today. I think this was great.